Welcome to the Women and Wealth podcast with Esther Szabo. Esther is a respected leader in the field of personal financial advice with over 25 years of experience. After going through her own significant and challenging life-changing events, she overcame fear and self-doubt to launch her own successful advisory firm. Now Esther is ready to share her practical and personal experiences to help other women clear their hurdles and brave life's transitions. In this way, she inspires women to lead fulfilling and confident lives.
Hello and welcome to Women and Wealth with Esther Szabo from Gates Past Advisors. Today, Esther has brought in a special guest, and that is Patrice Horvath, a realtor with Elan Panel. Patrice brings a wealth of experience and professionalism to her clients. She realizes that real estate is a relationship business and her clients are like family. She treats them with trust, integrity, and the loyalty they deserve. Patrice is an entrepreneur who knows that to be successful, she must produce the results her clients want. Their priorities become her priorities, and their goals become her goals. She takes her representation responsibilities very seriously and is committed to producing the greatest value for every client. Good morning, Esther. How are you?
I'm doing really well, Eric. I'm just loving this beautiful weather we're having as we're transitioning through spring. It just makes me feel really joyous and happy.
Nice. And you brought in a special guest. Can you tell us, how did you meet Patrice?
I met Patrice. We were at, as is so true for many of my guests, we were at a networking event together. And for those that don't know, Horvath, her last name is a Hungarian last name, and Szabo is also a Hungarian last name. So I approached her on that basis and I said, "Oh, are you Hungarian?" And she said, "No, I was married to one." And I said, "Well, I'm the daughter of one." And from there, that was many years ago, at least 10 years ago, I think. And I just really enjoy meeting with Patrice and talking with her and how she works with her clients. And I just find real estate really fascinating in terms of its connection to our lives.
I think you missed a slight opportunity there, because if it had been me, I would have said, "Are you hungry?" And then, we could have gone to lunch or something and discuss things that way.
Well, we were at a lunch.
Oh, okay.
But we often do meet over lunch and good food.
Yeah, and I believe Hungarian would be the proper way to say that. So, no, that's great. Thank you so much for bringing her in.
Oh God, I even missed that completely.
Oh,
I'm so used to people saying that about him. I'm like, I missed that completely.
Well, that's fun. All right, so what are we talking about today?
Well, we are talking with how Patrice works with her clients, who are often single women, about this very important part of their financial lives, their home, and how Patrice works with clients and helps them through these really challenging, big decisions about home buying and selling.
Patrice, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you so much for coming in. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Oh, thanks, Eric. It's a pleasure to meet you. And thank you, Esther, for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here today.
I'm glad you're here. I've been thinking about you since I launched the podcast. So we're finally here.
Fun.
All right. Where do we start today?
Well, I wanted Patrice to talk a little bit about her background and how she came into the field of real estate.
Okay. I'll just take a few minutes because it's a long story, but I'm going to make a long story very short. I was a single parent, divorced at a very young age, and made my living and supporting my daughter through high-tech sales here in Silicon Valley. So I spent a little over 20 years selling technology here in Silicon Valley to businesses, and I loved it. And what I loved about it was the relationship I had with my clients. I loved that, and I loved negotiating. I loved the deal, putting together a contract that was a win for my client and a win for the company I was representing. So I loved that. What wasn't a good match for me was the technology. So I always had to have a sales engineer glued to my hip. And whenever the conversation got technical, I looked at him or her and said, "Take it away." So the two things I loved about it were with the relationship, and it was the negotiating part of it. So when my daughter was gone and that financial part of my life was over, then I decided I wanted to do something new and start a second career. And this made perfect sense. I had always been fascinated by real estate and Silicon Valley real estate in particular. I owned a home and then I bought a second home. So I own 2 homes now and I love it. And I felt that the skill set was pretty transferable since there wasn't really a technology component to it. What I found was the portion of the career, my previous career that I loved, the relationship with my clients was intact. It was just a different type of relationship. It was much more personal and much more emotional. And the negotiating part was also a little bit more personal. Obviously, it wasn't a corporate fund that they were taking money out of. It was somebody's money, somebody's, retirement. So while the skills are transferable, it was a much more personal business. And I have loved it and actually wish I would have made the move years before.
Yeah, and I've seen you in action. We've talked many times about how we both work with clients navigating the emotional part of their decisions. It's not just transactions that we work with. And I often say to you, I'm with my clients for years and years and years, and you are typically with them for a much shorter period of time to help them through this transaction, but it's very intense. And so the path to building that trust and navigating it is much more steep and intense. Can you tell us a bit? I know you work with all types of clients, but what have you experienced? What dilemmas as you're building trust with women and helping them make decisions around their real estate? What dilemmas have you encountered?
That's a great question, Esther. And the first thing I'm super aware of, because I have been in this position most of my adult life, is I'm making a decision alone. So I don't have anybody to bounce the information off of. So I'm alone. So in dealing with women who have either are going through a divorce, have been through a divorce, have lost a spouse or a partner, have always been single, and gotten an inheritance of some kind, they're making a decision alone. So it's very frightening. You have nobody to bounce it off of. So I'm so aware of that because I have been through that and still continue to go through that on a daily basis, but I've gotten better at it. So that's number one. And there is a lot of fear around that. So I think women can get stuck in taking advice from their circle of friends, well-meaning friends that love them, care about their future, but everybody's advice is different. So it gets very, very confusing for women. Somebody will tell them something based on their own experience. Another person will give them advice based on their friend's experience. And so they're getting a lot of different, conflicting advice. So the first thing I do when I sit down with a client is really just listen. Listen to their situation, listen to the advice they've gotten, and try to find out a lot more about them and their situation. So I think that's the first thing, is that's where women get stuck. They're alone making a decision, and it's difficult.
Yeah, I can really appreciate that. And I have always noticed that with you, that you're not going in to, make a sale, close a transaction. You are very consultative. What are some other ways that it can be difficult? I know here we're in Silicon Valley, and it's well known how high priced the real estate is here. I've seen that with clients that it's very difficult to think. Everyone goes, well, great, you could sell your house for this.
Mm-hmm.
But the challenge is, and then what?
Mm-hmm.
Where do I go next?
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about how you've helped women transition and visualize the next step?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, first off, let me say that one size doesn't fit all. It really depends on where the woman is in her life. That's number one. So if a woman still has children at home that are going to schools and can't afford to stay in the house, then my advice would be stay in the house and let your kids go finish school. If the woman, my client, is not in that position, the kids are out of school, then it is hard for them to leave a home. And in this area, most women are in really lovely neighborhoods, lovely homes. And the fear is, again, fear. Am I ever going to be able to have this type of home again? Is my life, this type of home life, over for me? So again, it's really listening to them. What do they love about their home? And how do they see their next, 10 or 15 years? Is it community? Is it, what is really going to be important to them, close to their children? And really try to envision the home that they see themselves in. If it's not this, what do they love about the home they're in now? I have one client who has an absolutely gorgeous home. When I drove up to it, the first thing I thought of was, and if anybody's seen this movie, they'll understand, the movie with Meryl Streep and It's Complicated, that gorgeous California Spanish home on acres and acres. And that home happened to be in Montecito, but this home was not. But the minute I drove up and parked my car, that's what I thought of. And my mind was, wow, I wouldn't want to leave this either. So I went and met with her, and through our, 2 or 3 hour conversation, found out that it was actually stuck. She was completely stuck. She loved the home, and no one could blame her for that. And her kids were grown and out of the house, and she didn't know what to do. Does she rent the home? Where does she go? How is she ever going to find a home like that again? So we had to start talking a little bit about other areas in California that type of home she could afford, and then have money to potentially invest and live on. And there are so many other areas. So we went online and started looking at property in different parts of California, specifically up Northern California, into the wine country, into Healdsburg, into Petaluma, where she could buy acreage, have a beautiful home, probably smaller because she doesn't need a 4,000 or 5,000 square foot home. And once she started getting into, I could have that again, I could have this again in a new area, the fear starts to dissipate. And it's just getting people kind of out of their own heads and not listening to, well-meaning friends saying, you'll never find this again, because she will find that again, and maybe more. So I think it's just really walking them through the process and letting them know that, this is just an example. Los Altos Hills is not the only place to live. There are many places in California that are just as beautiful, and she would have, an amazing life.
I love that story of just connecting with someone and listening, and not trying to say, it's how we listen to the people, our clients, to listen to them rather than say, oh no, well, this is what we need to do. Just help them lead us. Can you give an example of someone who you have helped go on to the next great life in their new home? And yes, what that was like.
Sure. Absolutely. There is a client I worked with years ago. This is maybe 8 years ago, whose husband they had lived in their home for 25 years. Her husband died in an accident, very suddenly, very surprisingly, just in the weekend was gone. And her daughter was grown and married and lived in a different part of California. And she emotionally was, traumatized and stuck. And I worked with her for a good year, listening to her, understanding what she wanted to do, and listening to, her process the entire situation. And her home was super important to her because it was the first home they bought. It's the only home she had lived in with him, and the home they raised their daughter in. So I found out that her daughter had moved to Petaluma and settled in Petaluma with her husband. And I asked my client, Mary is her name, what about Petaluma? You could sell your house here for, $2.5 million and buy something there for probably $600,000, and life would be good. And her immediate thought was, no way am I going to live in Petaluma. That was her first response. But she decided to go up, spend the weekend, and get a feel for the community, for the people. And she came back and said, you know what? Petaluma is a lot more sophisticated than I thought. The restaurants are great. The people are great. I'm going to start looking. So I arranged an introduction to a good realtor in Petaluma, and she started looking. And fast forward, she found a house. We sold her house here in this area. She moved to Petaluma, remodeled the house. She sold a ranch house, bought a ranch house. So the houses weren't identical, but she bought something familiar in a different area that was for a lot less money, and remodeled it. And I decided to go visit her.
Mm-hmm.
So during the middle of the week, I went and took a trip to Petaluma, and I had her address, I had the street, and I had the address number in the back of my briefcase in the car. And I couldn't remember the address. So as I was driving down the street, I thought, okay, I'll see her car. And then it was like, no, I didn't see her car. I saw a front yard full of lantana. There's Mary's house. Her front yard here was full of lantana. I parked in front of the house, and there's Mary's bird bath. So I got inside the house, and while it was a different house, remodeled different, she had purchased new furniture, it was Mary's home. She had made it her home. When I walked into the kitchen was so familiar because everything she had on the kitchen counter at her old home, the bowl of fruit, the basket of teas, everything was the same. And to me, that was really, really comforting because I realized home isn't a house. She made this home her home, and she was very happy, very involved in the community, but it was so her home. She recreated it different because it was just her, but the same. And I took a lot of comfort in that's what home is, where she is. So that's one happy story.
I love that story. I just, it's so great for those who might be listening, who are challenged by this issue of, my life has just changed so much, and where is it going to end up? How will I ever have what I had before back? It really paints a really beautiful picture of, it's okay, give it time, test out some different things. Hopefully one is not under the gun to make a quick decision, because none of us make good, long-lasting decisions quickly, typically. And that one brings themselves wherever they go and can really create something beautiful. They created something beautiful once or twice. They can do it again. I just think that's a great example. If someone is considering purchasing or selling real estate, what are some other things that you recommend that they consider?
Well, I think they need to interview realtors, because it's a relationship, and it's a relationship through a very important life event, whether it's a sad and tragic life event or a good life event. It is a serious, big life event. So who you choose is really, really important. It's a relationship, and it's an important relationship. So I would make sure that the person you choose listens, does not have their own agenda and put everybody in a box. Everybody needs to do it this way. This is the way that I've been successful, so this is the way you're going to be successful. Because again, everybody's different and one size doesn't fit all. So choose somebody that's going to listen, and you're going to have a partnership, because that's what it is. The realtor should be holding your hand through the process, because most people only sell a home once. I mean, there's a misconception that people are moving up and changing homes and doing that. People really only sell a home once. So they need somebody who is really going to hold their hand through the process, listen to them, do what's comfortable. And so that's why I suggest people interview, 3 realtors and make sure they choose the one that is a match.
Mm-hmm. And I know that's really great advice, because it's, again, I think comes back to this feeling sometimes of being under the gun. Here, though I understand, things have slowed a bit, still it's a pretty fast-paced market. A lot can happen very quickly. And people probably have it's the same thing when people come to meet me. They've probably been thinking about doing it for like a year, 2 years.
Right.
And then they do show up and they feel like the pressure to like, okay, I've got to get this resolved and move on.
Right. That's right. And the other thing I like to advise women is, when they're in a life event like this, in a transition, to make sure not only talk to, and interview realtors, talk to a good financial planner, talk to somebody like Esther, because they're going to have a bucket of money. What do they do with that bucket of money? Especially if they're moving out of the area and they're selling a $3 million house and buying a $500,000 house, they're going to have a lot of cash. So what do they do with that? So sitting with a financial planner to put a plan together for their next 20, 30, 40 years, what is that going to look like for you? Because again, everybody's different and everybody has different visions in their head about what they want their life for. So talk to a really, really good financial planner, somebody who, again, is a good listener, because it is a big, big, big decision.
And that's why so much of this is collaborative. That's why it's so important to have a good network of other professionals with whom to work. So, Patrice, this is a situation that I run into where it's a life transition where there are seniors involved. And it could be the adult children coming to you. It could be a spouse where they're noticing that their partner or their parent is starting to experience cognitive decline. And they're talking about it's time to sell the house and move into a situation where they have more assistance and support. Do you have that experience that you could share what that's like on your side?
I have, Esther, a number of times. Sometimes the parent calls me and I sit down with the parent alone, and they're frustrated because their kids are telling them it's time to leave, it's time to leave, it's time to leave. So again, I really need to listen to them. And if I can see that their kids are right, it is time to leave, I recommend, why don't we all get together and map out a plan and see what's going to be the best for everybody. And I think that getting me inserted into that process and in between the kids and the mother, where the mother's not resentful, makes sense. And then all of us getting together, the kids then see that I'm really looking out for the best interest of their mom and not just trying to let's sell their house, move everything out and call it a day. Get other people involved, people that run, there's a number of communities in the area, assisted living communities, and have the kids, go and meet the people that run those facilities and tour them and start touring them and getting the mom used to that idea. Because there is a window of opportunity where they can move into a facility independently and then when needed, move into assisted living. So if they're already at the point where there is decline in dementia, they've kind of missed that window, and there are other facilities. But ideally, if somebody is still pretty healthy and just starting, to see signs of, mental decline, then that's the window. That's when you kind of jump on it. And I work with the family closely to make sure that the mom's taken care of, the house is fixed up so they can maximize and leverage all the equity in the home. And I like working with the families. It's enjoyable because it ends up being a less stressful situation than it could be. It's taking a very tough, stressful situation and making it a little bit easier on everybody. So
thank you so much. So I'm sure all the listeners can tell this is why I really appreciate professionals like Patrice and Patrice herself and how she really connects with her clients. And she works very hard to bring the pieces together, to be present, and to really help navigate this very big transaction in a way that really serves the client well. So I'm so grateful that you were able to spend time with us today, Patrice. It's been wonderful to hear you. I feel, as always, like I just want to hear more and more and more.
Thank you, Esther. It's been a pleasure. I could talk more and more and more. So, so thank you very much. And thanks for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Sure thing.
Yeah.
Patrice, thank you. Again, I'll say thank you as well. What I love about what you were talking about is Esther and I have had many, many podcasts where she talks about, or we've spoken about, the fact that one of her roles is to help remove the emotion about some of the decisions that need to be made. Because if you know your client well enough and you have that strong relationship, then you already have a list, if you want to call it that, of the things that they want, the things that they don't want, the fears that they have, the goals that they have. And when you have that relationship and you have that list, when it comes to looking at homes or when it comes to looking at investments, you're able to say, okay, does this fit the list that we originally spoke about? Even though you may be excited about it, you're excited about this home in particular, does it fit all the things that you truly wanted? And being able to go back and kind of test the waters with them while you're the non-emotional one or the one that's not super excited about possibly this new home, and bring them back down to earth to say, okay, it actually is missing the upper floor, right? This is
right.
Part of the roof is gone. Did you notice that piece of it? And so being able to do that, I obviously, this is why you have a good relationship with Esther. You guys are knit from the same cloth in that way. So I appreciate you being here, and I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate that. And yes, I think we are cut from the same cloth. I mean, I think that's why we work together very well with mutual clients, because we both care about them deeply and want, looking out for them in their best interests.
All right, Esther, thank you for bringing her in. And I'm going to just say it. I would like you to bring her back.
Absolutely. I can see that too. And Patrice, if people want to find you, to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
The best way would be my email, and that would be patrice@patricehorvath.com. Or you can always call me or text me at 650-520-7675. And my website is www.patricehorvath.com.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. And thank you all for listening to the Women in Wealth podcast with Esther Szabo. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Esther comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Again, thanks for listening today. For everyone at Gates Pass Advisors, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Women and Wealth podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you receive notifications of new podcasts as they become available. Check out the website at www.gatespassadvisors.com for more information. This content is developed from sources believed to be providing accurate information. The information in this material is not intended as tax or legal advice. Please consult legal or tax professionals for specific information regarding your individual situation. The opinions expressed and material provided are for general information and should not be considered a solicitation for the purchase or sale of any security.